Our political editor, Sue Jameson, is in Brussels for us this morning. And Sue, David Cameron thinking here that he'd reduce the impact of the crisis in Europe.
Yes, and it's something that he spoke about last night with President Hollande at Chequers at a pre-summit meeting. His argument, of course, is that at the moment there's only a tiny proportion of potential refugees actually in Europe. But unless more is done to ease conditions in those camps around Syria, that could change substantially. He's also going to talk today about trying to deport economic migrants more quickly, and all this after about the first 100 of the promised 20,000 refugees have actually arrived in Britain. I mean, today EU leaders want to find approval for an agreement yesterday to resettle by mandatory quota around 120,000 refugees, the idea being to take the pressure off Italy, Greece and Hungary. But already there's disagreement on that, with at least 4 countries saying they don't want to take part in mandatory quotas. Britain doesn't have to, because it's not part of the Schengen area, borderless Europe. But there's also a feeling that 120,000 refugees is way behind what's actually happening anyway.
Sue, thank you.
The first group of refugees has arrived in the UK since the government made that announcement. However, there's uncertainty over the arrangements for rehousing them here.
Yeah, the government's been criticised for not having its own plans firmed up enough. And Sue Jameson is in Brussels, where EU heads of state are discussing the crisis.
Well, the response to this massive refugee crisis still has a feeling of winging it, whether it's here in Brussels or in the other European countries trying to cope with thousands and thousands of refugees arriving, or in Britain, where around the first 100 of the promised 20,000 have arrived from those camps around Syria. Now, at the moment, it's not exactly clear where they're going, but the local government association has said they also need to know about funding. At the moment, funding is there for around a year. We know that these people are going to be able to stay for 5 years, and of course their needs will be great. Now, there is a statement we have from the Home Office which says we are working closely with the UNHCR, that's the United Nations on the ground, and local authorities to make sure we're ready to welcome more Syrians who desperately need our assistance. Now, David Cameron, of course, has said that around 20,000 will come from the camps around Syria, and he's going to try and persuade other EU leaders they should be putting more aid in there. But with the great need, critics say that Britain should be doing even more. And indeed, there are many communities, many families, many groups who want to offer some kind of sanctuary to more refugees, but at the moment that response is just, well, quite uncoordinated.
Sue Jameson reporting.
Sue Jameson is in Brussels for us this morning. And Sue, his idea is that it would reduce the impact of the crisis in Europe.
That's right, and ahead of the summit, he started that debate last night at Chequers when he hosted the French President François Hollande, because his idea is that unless you put in more money into the camps around Syria, housing millions of refugees, then the relatively small number who actually make it to Europe will grow. He also wants other EU leaders to address how to deport economic migrants as opposed to refugees more quickly. This, of course, after the first 100 of the promised 20,000 refugees arrive in Britain from around those camps. Now, today the EU leaders are going to be trying to find agreement over a plan approved yesterday to relocate 120,000 of the refugees, to take pressure off countries like Italy and Greece and Hungary. But already there are disagreements there, with at least half a dozen countries expressing doubts about having these mandatory quotas of refugees. Britain doesn't have to take part in that anyway, because we're not part of the Schengen borderless Europe. But already critics are also saying 120,000 refugees, that's hardly beginning to touch the problem.
Sue, thank you. Our political editor, Sue Jameson, is in Brussels. And Sue, the idea behind this is that he can stem the tide and reduce the impact of this crisis in Europe.
Yes, and he was sounding out his ideas last night with France's President Hollande at Chequers, a pre-summit meeting. But yes, he says that other countries should follow Britain's example, putting aid into those refugee camps, housing millions of people, alleviating conditions there that might then stop the flow of refugees into Europe. Of course, Britain has just accepted about 100 of the promised 20,000 refugees. He also wants EU leaders to address deporting economic migrants as opposed to refugees, more efficiently. But today is about the leaders signing off, as expected, an agreement yesterday to relocate around 120,000 refugees, taking the pressure off countries like Greece and Italy. Not all plain sailing. There are at least 4 countries don't want to be part of a mandatory quota system. Britain doesn't have to sign up to that, but there are a lot of people saying 120,000 refugees is a very small number when thousands more are arriving every week.
Sue, thanks for that.